All right, so hello and welcome everybody to the first panel discussion of the two-day long conclave that you're going to witness here on this stage today and tomorrow. Now, the theme of this session is, and that's important for all of you to understand, it's the frontiers of science, knowing the unknown. And of course, sitting before me are three incredible women, doyens of their own domain, super achievers I would like to address you as, and perhaps the first few to break the glass ceiling in your own respective fields. So ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause for our esteemed guests on the stage today morning. So this is how, ma'ams, this is how we are going to start. We'll give you 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes each for your starting comments, and then we take the discussion forward. So starting with you, Dr. Murthy. The theme, of course, I have told you, but because the space in which you are working, Director NIMHANS, tell me the status of mental health help in India today.
I think all of us need to know that about 1 in 10 people in the country suffers from a diagnosable mental disorder. And for every one person, perhaps when you look at the global statistics, it's about 1 in 5 people who possibly have this. And when you look at the number of people with psychological distress, it kind of is much more amplified. So I think the most important thing is for us to be aware that mental disorder is just like any other disorder that occurs to people. And that, during their lifetime or during certain times of vulnerability, people get mentally ill. And it's important to get help for that. So over the last 70 years, NIMHANS has been in the scene providing mental health care to millions of people around the country. And I think from an institution which has been providing care on site to actually using technology as a platform to now deliver care across technological platforms like the Telemanas.
Yeah.
We've come a long way. So I think it's important to recognize mental disorders, to find treatment for mental disorders. Now the World Health Organization looks at mental, neurological and substance use disorders together. So that you don't split the brain and the mind. You look at it together. We're doing that. And of course, that mental disorders coexist with physical disorders. So anybody with a chronic disorder who has to deal with it is likely to have a mental health issue. And persons with mental disorders also develop non-communicable disorders and can die 10 to 20 years earlier because of an NCD. Okay. So I think there's a lot out there that NIMHANS does in terms of treatment, in terms of prevention, in terms of developing primary and secondary care facilities so that everybody gets an equitable chance to get mental health care.
Amazing. All right. So Dr. Tole, tell me, a neuroscientist and research has been your strong area. Is research an option for everybody?
Thank you. That's a great question. I'm so glad to be opening with this. This is probably the best kept secret that we scientists need to share with everybody. I think it's a popular misconception. People who haven't had the privilege of a taste of doing research think it's this alien thing for specialists, and worse, they think it narrows you down so you only know about one thing. Nothing could be further from the truth. Research opens your mind to all possibilities because research is a way of asking questions. Research is a way of finding out. Yes, you might work on a particular problem and you might find deep things about a problem, but the techniques you learn, the approaches you learn are those that train you how to explore the world. So a research training, in fact, broadens your mind and encourages creativity and endows you with the ability to do jobs that are far beyond academia or science research or so on. In fact, PhD scientists are recruited by consulting companies because what consulting companies do is they solve other people's problems. Who best to solve problems than a trained research mind that knows how to set up the question? Research is actually an exciting, mind-broadening way of life. And anybody who has tasted it knows, now you all do too.
All right, let's see how many people decide to taste it after this. But Dr. Phalkey, now coming to you. And I would, it's an extension of the question that I asked Dr. Tole. Is science for everybody? I mean, you have an absolutely stunning, background going to SOAS where people go for Oriental studies in humanities. You come back chronicling and becoming the historian for science. Tell me, is science for everybody?
Thank you. Thank you for those kind words. Yes, I mean, following on Shubha's statement, there's not that much I can add. Science is for everybody. It absolutely is. And it's not only because it infiltrates every single thing we do today. In fact, we just saw in the session before, you have artificial intelligence impacting every single thing that we are doing. You have questions around climate change. You have questions around new gene technologies, new medical technologies. And so citizens are expected to take decisions in their day-to-day life based on information they do not know how to access. And so science is for everybody. Science should be known by everybody. And in fact, those are among the things that drove me from what was a sort of, a good, as I call it, middling, miserable career in academia where, I was in the bandwidth of misery that we all are, every day of research. But I took the plunge to do something I did not know I should do or could do, which is set up Science Gallery Bengaluru, precisely driven by that reason where I think, especially in India, I couldn't have followed the career that you just mentioned because doors are closed on you. Once at 15 or 17, you decide on a particular career. And what we need are two-way bridges between research and the public. And in order to do that, in order for the language of science, the knowledge that is created in the laboratories, but also in the human and social sciences, for that being accessible to people is a very, very important need, especially today and probably like never before. And that's probably what drives us all at the gallery. And we all come from different backgrounds. So if you come and see my team, we are divided across the human and social and natural sciences and engineering and design and so on and so forth. So it really doesn't matter. It's about keeping an open mind. It's about finding out what's actually happening around us. And most critically, how that matters to the decisions I'm expected to make when I go for medical treatment, when I go to buy something and its consumption, or when it's about changing my work practices because artificial intelligence tools, for example, in your classroom and your classrooms, I'm pretty sure students are starting to use these tools now. So what do you do with them, right? How do you shape ethical but also robust practices around teaching, around research, around medicine, around life, if you actually don't know anything about it? And so science is absolutely for everybody and must be so.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So to all of you ma'ams, the kind of research and work you've done is such high funder stuff. It goes above us, most of us. So I hope you'll not mind if I try and keep this discussion today a little relatable for our audience so that there are substantial takeaways for them with which maybe they can get some better perspective towards the life that we are all living. So here's my first question, and that's for you, Dr. Murthy. With so much of study and research that has been done on human brain, does the human mind still continue to surprise you?
You just heard it in the last session. In fact, both the sessions talked about how surprising the human brain is. And I think what we do is we focus on research, training, as well as clinical practice and try to see what it is about research that we can translate into better either care for patients or indeed for the prevention of disorders, what kind of lifestyle changes need to occur. And it's very surprising that people will tell you that for several degenerative disorders like dementia, there are preventive lifestyle risk factors that you can change. And to me, that's one of the biggest lessons that research has shown us. And it's also very important to look at research from the basic sciences. So for example, we have research in genetics, in epigenetics, and so on. You can do a lot of research from imaging the brain, where you can actually see what is through functional brain imaging, what parts of the brain get activated or deactivated in certain conditions. So there are several other fingerprints, if you can call them, to understand the functioning of the brain and mind. And so we're trying to put all these fingerprints together, and trying to understand what is it that increases risk to various kinds of mental and neurological disorders, what indeed can be promoting factors for health, whether it's brain health or, you know, the health of the mind, what is it that you can do? So trying to converge all of this is very exciting. And for that, you need good collaborations between scientists, between researchers, doing basic science research, which might be animal research, research that we say is on the bench, to looking at what can be converted into results at the bedside, and then what is it that you can take to the community then, for a larger kind of, you know, mental and neuroscience health. So that's something that we're doing. And actually, last year we got the Nelson Mandela Prize from the World Health Organization for health, you know, for health promotion. And that's the whole idea, that before you can actually develop disease, that there are a whole lot of processes, upstream processes. One typical example that I'll give you is what can happen with adverse childhood events, and how they can actually change the way the brain kind of, you know, networks and so on, and can, you know, cause problems later in life. So if we actually paid attention, perhaps from animal models to understanding the science of how this happens, we might be in a position to kind of intervene before problems occur. Of course, for all of us, there are very, very serious problems. How, for example, can you prevent the onset of dementia? What can you do for movement disorders? What can you do in terms of appropriate treatments for schizophrenia, for mood disorders, etc.? You know, minimizing the side effects that people have, and, you know, making sure that they recover, not just recover from the disease, but actually are reintegrated into society. So there's a whole lot of things that can be done, and there is a lot of exciting research, as I said, from the basic sciences, from the clinical sciences, from the neurosciences, trying to address all of these. And I think we now have the tools. And of course, we were talking about AI in the morning, so I think the use of, you know, using big data and having analytics on that data to actually try and, you know, find results. But at the end of it, I think something that we discussed in the morning, that compassion and empathy is really the bulwark on everything else that needs to come up. And I think as a society, humanity, humaneness is something that we mustn't forget, is really the core of all that we do.
Wow, that's coming in from a doctor. All right. Dr. Tole, you've, of course, been researching extensively in this area. What's your perspective on this?
On what has surprised me in my research?
About the human brain.
Well, I would say the most surprising experiences of my career, I've run a lab for 26 years now, is the unexpected creativity of the students that actually produce the discoveries. Our students come from all walks of life, all over the country, and they've managed to retain that spark of inquiry and curiosity almost despite our education system. Our very channeled education system that forces people to make long career decisions, medicine or engineering, and otherwise you're worthless. Oh my God, if we can bust a few myths. Everything that is interesting in biology is not medicine. Medicine is one aspect of what is interesting in biology. Everything that's interesting in physics is not engineering. Engineering is one aspect. And certainly you don't need to draw diagrams to do biology.
How did you manage to convince your parents? I want to know. I mean, this was long back when you decided to take this field.
My parents, actually, my dad is in the audience now at 88. They're the most broad-minded people I know. From my mom, she's no more, she was an occupational therapist at Tata Cancer Hospital. She showed me by her example that you don't let your job definition limit what you do in life. She absolutely broke the barriers and did everything she wanted to help her patients. And I translate that to students by telling them your syllabus is not the limit of what you learn. It's actually the lower bound. The upper bound can be anything. And from my dad, I got how to have the long view of life. How to plan, how to buffer local problems, how to keep the goal in sight, how to keep what is valuable important. So, Dad, that's for you. My students come from various backgrounds. Maybe some of them didn't have the kind of environment I did, but I think each of them is a unique mind. And what has surprised me the most, to go back to your question, is simply how it's able to tap into their creativity and offer them a project in which their mind will flourish. We get unexpected things. So I see my lab as a neural network, and each mind doing something that I would not be able to do alone, or nor each individual, but everybody takes it in new directions, and all of our discoveries have come from matching the creativity of the student with the project, where they see something through that microscope in that brain they're looking at, which nobody else saw before them. All our discoveries have come from this. So what impresses me is the creativity and uniqueness of the human mind, and that's what we need to nurture in our children.
Wow. Dr. Phalkey, this question for you. You know, because we are doing this one round in human brain, so the final question to you, what does chronicling the history of science tell you about the human brain? You've seen the process, the path, haven't you?
So you know, because I don't lack audacity, I'll answer the question. But my specialism is in the history of physics, 20th century physics largely. But I think from learning from my colleagues, but also my conversations with Pratima, with Vidita Vaidya, who's a colleague of Shubha's at TIFR, I think what we've understood, and this in fact speaks back to the previous panel as well, what we've understood more and more is the nature of the plasticity of the brain. Number one, we haven't understood the brain fully. Number two, the brain is plastic, in a sense that its abilities to make connections and its abilities to move from one kind of, you know, circuitry to another kind of circuitry over time and over age, it is not fully understood, but it's quite amazingly large. And the second thing the third thing, and since I love to work in threes, I'll stop at that. We have come, so this is the age of, so I call Bangalore the city of bros and brews. So this is the age of the tech bros, and we see that, it's visible everywhere. That's the language in which we are today conducting our discussion on technology, on better futures, on how we imagine society to be. And in that, we have prioritized the machine to the extent that we have forgotten that the machine is actually quite a fascinating creation of our own brain. And so forgetting that is in fact undermining our own capacity to have, in one way, undermining our own capacity, undermining, but on the other hand, sort of overestimating our capacity to have created what we could have. So to see the mirroring of natural intelligence in artificial intelligence is, to me, still quizzical, at least, if not difficult to grasp. So that would be my sort of long-term historian's view on the brain.
Okay. All right. I want to get down to some brass tacks now. For the two of you, Dr. Murthy, Dr. Tole, tell me one thing. When it comes to research into this area, into human brain and looking into the mental issues, do we get adequate funding, whether it is from the government or from different sources? What is the status of that? How much help do you get when you really require it?
So let me say, what you need for research is good ideas, and I think that's very, very important to have. You also need the kind of trained human resources you need to conduct research, and of course you need the laboratory, the other kind of equipment, etc., to be able to do it. One of the things also, I think, particularly in mind and brain research, is really to have that kind of intersectoral collaboration. Because we know now that physics, for example, is as important perhaps, and an understanding of how machines work is as important perhaps as just the knowledge of how the mind and the brain works. So to that extent, a lot of collaboration is required. There are several agencies which do provide research help and research support. There's the ICMR, the DBT, the DST, to name a few. But what I also want to emphasize is that in addition to these kind of supports that we have, nowadays, philanthropy, for example, is really stepping it into a big way, particularly since you're talking about Bangalore. We have not only NIMHANS, we have the Center for Brain Research. There are people, for example, who have been large philanthropic supporters. For example, we have the Rohini Nilekani Foundation, which has supported NIMHANS as well as NCBS with a 5-year very generous grant to look at what might be common risks across different mental disorders. We have other organizations which are looking at the epidemiology of stroke. So I think it's a combination. Of course, we need much more. You know, I think we also need to be able to ask the right kind of research questions which are very important for our own population at risk. And being such a large country, we have a huge population. Even if the prevalence of certain disorders may be, you know, low, the problem is that the magnitude of the distress it produces, both to the individual and the family, is huge. So we really need to look at more, more funding opportunities, but we also need to train young minds to get attuned to research. And I think there's a big need there to look at young people to kind of, address themselves to research. And there are, for example, the ICMR has now funded something called the clinician researcher, where medical doctors get interested in research. So I think we're seeing the trend in that direction.
We're getting there.
But we need much more.
Okay, Dr. Tole, government funding, do you think the government's interested in this space in our brains?
Funding.
Be honest.
I'll be absolutely honest. I have two important points to say, and I hope these actually have an impact. First, I'd like to thank the taxpayer, because your funds fund our research. Okay, in India, a great overwhelming percentage of the research funding comes from the taxpayer, and we owe it to everybody to share some of the joys of it. But 2 points. I'm not going to talk about the quantum of funds. Okay, that's whatever money there is. What I'm going to talk about is what type of human resources those funds are used for, and the timely disbursal of said funds. Okay, we can buy equipment. Buying actually fancy, gizmos, microscopes, machines to explore the atom or the brain, or lasers and so on. These can be purchased, but it's very difficult to actually appoint a person of the right abilities, training, background, and pay them enough to retain them to be able to actually operate those machines at a very high level. Okay, so the system that we have does not allow us to retain these kinds of human resources. They get sucked up by companies who can actually pay them what they deserve. Abroad, you have heads of entire facilities who might make as much or more as the faculty, but we have a little bit of a hierarchical system where only research faculty sort of can reach a certain level of. We just don't have the structure where our facilities are, and the people who operate them and who do so with great, it's not just a mechanical operation, they do so with great intelligence and investment.
So you are unable to retain the best minds for the lack of money. Would you say that?
For the lack of the type of position. The lack of the type of position. Okay, I'll elaborate more on that in private, but the other point I don't want to lose is the timely disbursal of funds. Okay, I'm very privileged. I am from the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, which is funded by the Department of Atomic Energy. Our funds are released on time, and our students get paid directly by these funds. But across India, students are paid by CSIR fellowships. These don't come on time. The very young minds who come hungrily to do research are expected to wait for months. We're talking months, okay, or sometimes more than a year even, without pay, because they will get arrears later. What's the problem? This is a problem. How are you going to inspire somebody to do research when they're not getting their monthly paycheck? This is a basic human rights problem. Funds are not dispersed on time, and we do this to our youngest people, upon whom the future of the country rests. These people are going to make the next inventions, right? And this is how we treat them. Okay. So, timely dispersal of fellowships, timely dispersal of grants. People who are not as fortunate as I am at TIFR, they rely on grants from the DBT, DST, what will now be the ANRF. If these grants don't come on time, how are you going to compete with people whose grants do come on time? How are you going to hire the staff? How are you going to buy the equipment? If you suddenly don't get money for a year because, some piece of paperwork has not been filed, or, or so you hear after 6 months of delay. So, timely, proper management of funds. I'm not questioning the quantum. I'm saying just give it on time. The country's research will thrive.
Dr. Phalkey, tell me this. I mean, we heard both the ma'ams, and, while they do not want to say it in as many words, they pretty much expressed their distress at this issue. But you tell me, getting collaboration from the government of Karnataka, the Indian Institute of Science, the NCBC, the Srishti Institute, I believe not an easy job. I mean, when you decided on starting this science gallery in Bangalore. So my question to you is, how much of being a public intellectual is also engaging with the outside world effectively?
Good Lord, that's a big question. Let me just quickly add a footnote to what Shubha just said and then answer your question very, very briefly, because there's a brief answer to that question. So the first thing is, I think, inadequate as it is, science in India is is mainly funded only by the state. We have very, very little other kinds of money when compared with other countries. We also do not have an arm's length funding body for science like the National Science Foundation or the UK Research Councils and similar research councils in other European countries and other countries across the world as well. So our funding system is skewed, it is largely state funded, and that has consequences because, of course, like all processes that government runs, they're bureaucratized and run by protocol. The second thing is industry funding for research in India is very, 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 very little. It's growing, but it's very little when compared with elsewhere. And I say this with full awareness of the fact that, for example, when large foundation funding comes in, fields change. And the perfect example for this is the rise of molecular biology because of two reasons. In the middle of the later half of the 20th century, following the Second World War, the world trained a humongous number of physicists, especially in America and Europe, because somehow that was the frontier of the field, particle physics, nuclear physics, so on, and high energy physics, so on and so forth. And then at some point, they had nowhere to go because there were too many. I'm caricaturing an argument, but it's not without more than a kernel of truth and value. They turned to bioinformatics and molecular biology. So physicists brought their tools to study biology, as a result of which new fields in biology were born. So what we need to also be aware of is that if foundation and private funding, and this was largely Rockefeller Foundation money, if that can change the direction of research, then what happens when the state funds research? Is that also shaping the direction of research per se, or not? Should it or not? Should there be arm's length funding bodies or not? And I think that landscape in India is so badly developed, or rather underdeveloped, that has consequences. Now coming to my own work so the setting, right, like the setting of the Science Gallery Bengaluru being established by the government of Karnataka in partnership with the Indian Institute of Science, National Center for Biological Sciences and Srishti Institute of Design, was something that was in place before I came along. I've had to nurture and further those relationships, but I think this is a function of, and this is the last sentence about it, this is a function of, and the audience needs to be aware of the fact that I'm from Bombay, so don't hold it against me. Karnataka has a vision group. The government of Karnataka has a vision group in which sit academics, industry leaders, and bureaucrats. And they are often deciding on the priorities for science and engineering funding, where it should go, how it should go. This has in some ways been necessitated by the number, and I think it exceeds 500 now, of R&D units of foreign multinationals.
Okay.
We just again saw it in the previous panel.
Are you saying the government of Maharashtra is lacking this vision?
I think there is no other state in India that has it.
Okay.
Don't make me say anything. I'm from Bombay, dude.
I hope the government and the Chief Minister is listening. But Dr. Murthy, here is a question that I believe every parent in this country would like to know the answer to this question. Most of us would be interested in this. The question is, does the use of technology, and when I say technology in the form of everyday gadgets, like the mobile phone, the video game, the PlayStations, infants getting hooked on to something called Cocomelon on YouTube, does that really impair the brain functioning, affect the brain functioning and the memory in any manner whatsoever?
Yeah, it looks like the honeymoon phase of digital technology is now giving way to the bit of a nightmare that we are seeing, particularly among young people. So we actually have a clinic for the healthy use of technology.
Okay.
And we're increasingly seeing young people, young children actually come in with an excessive use of technology, which is impairing their ability to focus on their academics, which is impairing their ability to make social connections, which is also impairing, and again, the research is now suggesting that in terms of emotional well-being, in terms of cognitive well-being, excessive, I'm using the word very carefully, excessive use of technology can have very adverse consequences. People are looking at the time spent for example, in front of a desk, and the ergonomic consequences it can have on the musculoskeletal system. So right from the brain, emotions, cognitions, as well as other ergonomics, and finally, of course, the social connectedness. Especially for people who have difficulty with social connectedness, it's very easy to get addicted to a gizmo or a gadget. And that furthers their difficulty in terms of making those social connections. So we still don't have global guidelines or indeed national guidelines on exactly what is the time that you can safely use with gadgets. But of course, there's a lot of...
But you're getting such patients. You know,
Of course we are,
I want to connect this with something that I got to know very recently, just blew my mind. This was a doctor at AIMS who was treating a child, the child who was not being able to connect with his surroundings, not talking much, very quiet, not interacting. You know what he ended up saying? He said that while the mother was carrying this child, while she was pregnant, she was perhaps hooked on to the phone and TV a bit too much. And that's why the child is like that. And I want to know if that is true. I mean, he came back to me saying, Madam, mujhe doctor sahab ye keh rahe hain, aisa hua hai kya?
It's a very attractive medium to get, engaged with.
Yeah.
And when you look at the brain circuits for addiction, there are what are called the reward circuits for addiction. And in fact, last year, when I was going to the Delhi, through the Delhi airport, there was this young infant of about 8 months, in one of those little baskets. And the parent, to quieten the child, because the child was crying, was showing the child something on her mobile phone.
Yeah.
So when children are accustomed to looking at these and getting immediate kind of gratification, it is indeed very easy for them to kind of get hooked onto it. And similarly for slightly older children as well, because these are things that give a high. Just like, for example, we talk about chemical addictions, you can have behavioral addictions as well. Whether it's technology, whether it's, using the mobile phone, whether it's pornography, whether it's online shopping, these things are potentially capable, particularly in vulnerable individuals, for an addiction to develop. And that's why it's so important to make sure that technology is used for the right purposes. Otherwise, there can be these negative side effects. And indeed, we see a lot of children, a lot of parents seeking help for this.
So clearly, this is a problem.
And, to the extent that a child sometimes spends 8 to 10 hours not even eating on time.
Yes.
Forget about sleeping, getting the physical activity. So it's a real problem that I think we need to
It's
address.
a real problem. Dr. Tole, Dr. Phalkey, you'd like to chip in here?
I need to join that clinic at NIMHANS because I'm on my phone all the time. I work on my phone. So here's the thing, right? And please allow me to repeat something which you'll hear me repeat until I'm alive and able to speak, which is something that a historian of technology said. He was at Georgia Tech, where I studied. He's got something called 10 laws of technology, Kranzberg's 10 laws of technology. And the first one is technology is neither bad nor good, nor is it neutral. And I think that's the piece that we need to kind of work with. And our work habits have changed, right? Which means that I'm expected to work when I'm in the car. I'm expected to take a call. People panic when you don't answer the phone for 15 minutes. As a result of which I developed 2 tennis elbows. So, from just texting too many times, for multiple hours. So healthy use of technology clinic, I'm getting myself admitted. Thankfully, it's in Bangalore. But I also, need to go for occupational and physical therapy following this. So there is, technology is, it is ubiquitous. It is there and it's taking different forms and we build our relationships to it. And that's why the thing I said about, the culture of the culture around how we are discussing technology and human future is very important. What are we expected to do with technology? What is seen to be good use of technology? Am I supposed to be the efficient technology user who, at the cost of this body, which holds the mind that actually made that machine possible in the first instance? Or am I expected to get that machine to do my dishes so that I can actually sit and read a book?
Right. So finally, now coming to the last question that I would like to throw at all of you, trying to address the elephant in the room. Everybody knows this is a problem, but nobody really talks much about it. And this is about the mental illness. you know, the mental disorders that people like us, our generation after us, have been in a very, very wide, extensive manner been facing at this moment. In our society, see, when it comes to a mentally ill person, he is discriminated upon. I mean, that's something we've all lived, seen, experienced what happens to people like that. But even, you know, things like just anxiety, depression, mild bipolar disorder. Why is that stigma still attached? I mean, I can't quite understand that why are all these things perceived as signs of weaknesses and not as genuine health problems? How do we fix it? What are your thoughts on that? This is a question for all three of you. We can, you know, decide whoever wants to go first. And tell me what from your perspective should be the solution to this. I mean, till when are we going to be so cagey about, okay, I am going for a session? To be very honest, Dr. Murthy, I have taken sessions at NIMHANS and I don't have a problem in accepting that. I lost somebody very dear to me in the family and I thought I needed help. Fortunately, I had a friend in NIMHANS who also teaches there and treats patients, so he led me there. But how many people will have the access that I have, or maybe, you know, the mental state to be able to do it? So take this question.
Shall I take it first? Okay. I mean, I think as you said, I mean, you know, thank you for talking about it. And I think you're one of the lucky ones who was able to access that help.
Perhaps.
Not everybody has that ability and accessibility for such help. So I think stigma comes from two large areas. One is the systemic stigma as a society, that we understand mental disorders very differently from physical disorders, which it shouldn't be. And that's why there's a slogan, there is no health without mental health. That's very important. And the second is the perceived stigma, which is a personal sense of, you know, if I talk about mental disorders, what will happen? What do people think about me? So while we can take help for a headache or a chest pain, when you have an acute psychiatric breakdown or acute depression or an acute illness, people are more hesitant to take help. So I think addressing the stigma is very, very important. And the only way to do that is to talk much more about it, to make available and the knowledge about the resources. So for example, people need to know, and that's very important. I know where to go when I have a physical disorder. Similarly, I should be able to go, and such help should be available in all health clinics, whether it's medical colleges, whether it's at the district level. So we do have something called the National Mental Health Program, which at every district has the mental health. Through the Ayushman Arogya Mandirs, focusing on mental health, addressing common disorders like depression and anxiety. How can people help themselves psychologically? And of course, a lot of people don't know that there is treatment available, medical treatments, other physical treatments, which can shorten the duration of the mental disorder and can get people much better and back on their toes. What I can tell you finally is that I have doctors, lawyers, engineers, scientists who've had episodes of mental disorder, had taken help and have completely recovered. And of course, we know that all chronic disorders are likely to be chronic relapsing conditions. So we don't have any problems when it comes to diabetes or hypertension and people discontinuing their treatment.
Yeah.
The same thing happens with mental disorders. So one of the things, for example, for addiction, which is an area that I work in, we've had follow-up counselors who kind of keep in touch with people a few months after they've been treated. And it's amazing that people don't come back to treatment because they feel guilty, because they feel ashamed. And that's something that we need to deal with, to look at mental disorders just like we do any other physical disorder, get the kind of help available, take the treatment that's available, make the lifestyle modifications. And now we know that lifestyle modifications are important for any kind of chronic disease.
Yeah.
Diet, your physical well-being and activity, sleep, how to handle stress, how to develop resilience, how to maybe be comfortable and know simple ways of how to look after your mental health. These are very important for all of us, as well as people who have a diagnosable mental disorder. So I think talking much more about it, having services which are affordable and accessible. The telemanas, for example, you won't believe that there have been more than 18 lakh calls in the last couple of years. And what are the calls for? Not for any serious problem, not too many of those, but for sleeplessness, for relationship difficulties, for feeling low in mood, for being able to handle, breakups. These are some of the kind of problems that people need. So first of all, I think we need to know how to take care of ourselves first. how to reach out for help in a confidential manner, but in a non-stigmatizing manner, so that we can be confident about getting back to where we were.
Yeah.
So whether it's workplaces, whether it's educational institutions, whether it's students in higher education, I think stress is all around, and I think we need to help each other to overcome that.
Dr. Tole?
I cannot add to what Dr. Murthy has said. Dr. Murthy is actually a real doctor. I'm a scientist doctor. But I would like to talk about creating a family network so that you can better support and be there for your child as they might go through episodes where they genuinely are diagnosed with a mental health disorder or they need help. We see students go through crises of what am I doing in life? In fact, the teenage years of great brain profusion. The teenage brain has actually been well studied. It's a time when circuits come online that one almost didn't have before. Abilities, creative angles, it's a time of self-discovery. We've all seen teenagers go through this. One moment they're, mommy, daddy's little baby, and the next moment they're this entirely new species. This new species with new abilities, thoughts, directions, and the need to be grounded as they introspect and discover who they are. I think parents need to do a lot of work before this stage is reached. I think parents could perhaps not limit their children by their own constraints or by their own upbringing or limitations. What if I may know nothing about, say, music or sports or something, but what if I say, hey, let me offer my child a sampling of a physical activity, be it sports or dance, a musical activity, some instrument, some vocal, a creative activity, maybe a new language, a sort of mathematical, science-based activity, maybe a slew of jigsaw puzzles. Offer these all to your child and see where they bite. You may have never been interested in one of these, but hey, your child might discover something and then discover how to grow that ability. And then when they go through their self-discovery, they know that the parents are okay with it. And this can be a metaphor of many things, right? Your child will go through self-discovery, and if they're okay telling the parents about it and knowing that the parents are going to help them, even if the parent doesn't know anything about that field. Okay, a sort of example, when my child was 4, Abhay, he joined me in Kathak class under Sanjukta Wagh. Today he's 22, he's been learning Kathak all the time. He's a history major at Ashoka. Okay, my husband and I are both scientists. We discovered the fact that historical analysis actually has parallels with scientific analysis. And we have discussions about this. Our wonderful education system makes us choose between arts and science. And now we're discovering the joys of history through my son, who has decided to take up Kathak as a professional career. And it is a joy to support him in this. It is the job of children to extend us in new directions. And if we help them in their times of crisis, as they go through self-discovery, I think everybody would be so much happier and we would make so many more advances.
Absolutely. Dr. Phalkey, finally, closing comments with you. Are we still a long way when we try and equate a diabetes and a blood pressure and a bipolar mental disorder?
So here's the thing. We did an exhibition called Psyche just after the pandemic. It was online. My learning from that exhibition was that here's the thing. If there's a problem with your eye, or even the perception of sight is managed in the brain. What I'm trying to say is that we perceive the brain in the brain. That's not true of any other sense or any other function of our body. So if there's what do I mean by that, right? Like you understand touch through your brain, but you understand the brain again through your brain. And what that means is that when there is a problem in managing your mind, or maybe even parts of your, some kind of circuitry in your brain, it has to be perceived by the self-same organ. And that's actually just absolutely incredible to, when I grasped it, it was just incredible to understand. But that's what we are dealing with, right? Like there's an incredibly complex organ that we possess, that we understand very little about, and we have to make sense of it when it goes wrong for ourselves, and with the help of others who understand it equally inadequately.
Right.
Right? And so I think that journey is going to be a difficult one, but it's also a beautiful one because you recognize and you realize different parts of your own perception, your own abilities in being able to do that. And to summarize a conversation that we had, in fact, at Manotsava, a mental health festival organized at NIMHANS, where in the panel with your colleague Vidita Vaidya and Nachiket Moore, the conclusion was as follows. You need to sleep well, you need to exercise well, and you need to develop and maintain different kinds of sociality. People at work, people in the family, as you mentioned, people around you, siblings, people you choose to have in your life. Build and deepen and maintain those relationships. Those are the three things one can do in that journey towards just grappling, understanding, building your perception and your brain.
Thank you. Thank you really for the advice, and thank you for flying in from Bengaluru for this session.